Hi, I'm Kesenya and welcome to Guiding Star Astrology. I'm your Astro Weather Girl, here with this week's Astro Weather Report. I'm going to show you how the stars are going to affect your life this week. Well, hello everybody. Welcome to this week's Astro Weather Report. I'm your Astro Weather Girl and I can't wait to explore this week's energies with you. We're looking at the week beginning on the 4th of June, Saturday the 4th of June to the 11th of June. Keep in mind as I do this reading that this is a reading for your personal empowerment, for your personal edification, not the big collective experience, not what's going on in each country around the world. This reading is for you. I do mundane astrology and I love it, but this particular reading is designed for the individual. We're still all under the influences of the eclipses that have occurred just recently. The continuing non-exact square between Saturn and Uranus is still there to some level, and the recent new moon in Gemini are all affecting us. We're all under those influences, but I want to look at what's coming up this week that's going to cause some sort of fruition or experience or emotion that occurs in our lives. So what I'm speaking about today is what's going to affect you, how you will feel, what you might encounter in the week ahead. Firstly, how did you all enjoy the new moon in Gemini? It was one of the most surprising and most beautiful new moons of the year, and I hope it all was a blessing for everybody. It was conjunct Aldebaran, one of the great fixed stars, one of the royal stars of ancient Persia, a wealth star, a star of military power. So for our personal lives, that would therefore correlate to being able to strategize well in our life. So if you didn't catch my video last week all about the new moon in Gemini, do check it out because you might be surprised at what it brought you. And that video will highlight the influence of the new moon in Gemini. So do check that out. It's in my weekly astrology list on the YouTube channel. And if you haven't liked or subscribed liked this video or subscribed to my channel, then I'd love to have you join me here on a more regular basis. So please do subscribe and join our YouTube community here. So what's coming up this week? What's some key events? And the number one key event that we're going to be looking at is Saturn going retrograde. Saturn is going to be going retrograde in its own sign, Aquarius, and this is happening on the 5th of June. So Saturn usually is retrograde for about half the year, every year. So it's a familiar energy to humanity, no matter what dire predictions some astrologers might give it. Whenever the sun moves into sort of this half, so Saturn is here in Aquarius, and the sun in this half of Aquarius. So here's Aquarius, and the sun moving here will cause Saturn to appear like it's going backwards in the sky from our vantage point here on Earth. So for half the year, the sun moving through these 6 signs relating to Saturn, that will cause us to have a Saturn retrograde experience. And this is when Saturn is at its closest point to the Earth. So it's brightest in the sky when it's retrograde, and its energy is felt at a stronger level. We're going to break that down in just a second. So what this might look like for us personally in our lives is that when Saturn turns retrograde, we can tend to, because the energy is intensified, we can have trouble with boundaries. Like Saturn is all about boundaries, restrictions, putting parameters around things. That's part of Saturn's mission here on Earth. And when his energy is intensified through being in retrograde motion, we have trouble with boundaries. We have difficulty with boundaries. And that can look like having too many limitations in our life, too many restrictions on our lives. But it can also look like the opposite too for some people. Some people will have too little in the way of parameters. They can't restrict themselves. They can't give themselves, draw that line in the sand for themselves, and people walk all over them. Difficulties with boundaries are the main hallmark of Saturn retrograde. But one thing's for sure, boundaries are no longer moderated with Saturn retrograde, and they tend to go to the extreme. Now, Saturn's going to be retrograde, as I've illustrated here, for the duration of the sun's travel through all of these signs. And so we're going to be seeing the duration of Saturn retrograde lasting until October 22nd, from 4th of June till October 22nd, depending on where you are in the world. It's 5th of June here in Australia, 4th of June it will be for most other places in the world. So he actually entered his pre-retrograde shadow phase on the 26th of February. What that means is Saturn was moving through the degrees, but moving in a direct motion through the degrees that he was going to retrograde through now. And that's been going on since the 26th of February. Saturn was at 18 degrees of Aquarius on the 26th of February, and so that is the point that he's going to move back to. Currently, he's at 25 degrees of Aquarius. So he's going to move backwards in the sky from our vantage point. That's what it's going to look like from the Earth, back to 18 degrees of Aquarius. And then he'll turn direct again and start moving forward. So if you have planets around or between 18 and 25 degrees of Aquarius, where Saturn will be retrograding, you'll feel this strongly. But also, if you have planets between 18 and 25 degrees of the other fixed signs, namely Taurus, Scorpio, and Leo, you'll also feel this very strongly. You may even get a bit of an impact as well, although in less of a harsh, noticeable manner. You might also get an impact if you have planets between 18 to 25 degrees of the other air signs, Libra and Gemini. These signs, as you can see, they make a trine aspect to Aquarius, and so the energy of the impact is more of a positive nature rather than a harsh nature, which could be felt more by the fixed signs. We're going to explore what might unfold. We've already talked about boundary issues, but we're going to explore what might unfold for each and every sign when we go through the all signs breakdown. So think back to February the 26th. Did you notice any life changes or any events of significance around that time? This is one thing I find very helpful, is to keep an astrological journal so that I can refer back to certain times in the year. If, if I didn't realize back on the 26th of February that it was actually Saturn entering his shadow period, but I was noting down, this happened to me today and I talked to this person, or this went wrong or this went right, then I can look back in that journal and find out, okay, how was Saturn influencing me when he moved into his shadow phase? So it's very helpful to keep an astrological journal. I currently have astrological journals on sale for over 50% off on at my Astro shop in the website. So feel free to pop there if you want to get yourself an astrological journal. They're brilliant. I'm loving using my astrological journal this year, and you might like to jump in and buy one now while they're so cheap. But Saturn retrograde, what does it mean in general? Well, rules, restrictions, and parameters, things that Saturn is the governor of, they're harder to get a grip on now because they either they're coming more intensely, or we're overwhelmed by them and then we pull back and just ignore them completely. Because everything is energy. And of course, Saturn is closer in the sky, he's brighter in the sky, his energy is stronger. How do our bodies handle it? Too much, walk away, can't deal. Or we find that we are restricted. It's one or the other. These rules, restriction, parameters, harder to get a grip on because they go to an extreme polarity. They don't make sense. We find it harder to understand why we've got to toe the line. Why have I got to follow this rule? It makes no logical sense to me. Why I've got to do this? This is like a time of not confusion, but just frustration with the rules, frustration with the parameters. Not a rebellious energy, but it's harder to be in alignment. to understand what is required of us when Saturn is retrograde. So Saturn is also discipline. Saturn is also responsibility. And in our personal lives, it's harder to implement discipline. It's harder to implement that responsible nature, that mature attitude that Saturn might usually otherwise give us. So we can find ourselves acting more immaturely than we otherwise would during Saturn retrograde, but usually in relation to where Saturn is transiting. Let's say Aquarius was your 11th house. Maybe, you might find that your relationships with friends is suddenly a bit more immature, and you don't have time for getting to the deep nitty-gritty, meaningful conversations you usually do with your friends. It's all about, what's happening with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, and goss, and what's the weather like, and so on. And there's this lack of depth in our friendships, or we fail to be responsible for our friends. Our friend gets sick, but we're too busy dealing with whatever we're dealing with. We haven't got time to take them a casserole because they're sick, Our discipline and our responsibilities to our friends, Saturn retrograde in the 11th house, can be harder to implement too. We can have difficulties saying no and putting boundaries in place. Maybe if we have Saturn retrograding in our 11th house, for example, we might have friends who come to stay and they just never leave. So how do we put a boundary? How do we draw a line in the sand? No boundaries. Our friend has come to stay for a couple of days and they've ended up staying for a month. Boundaries are more difficult to put in place pertaining to where Saturn is retrograding. Anxiety can be felt in certain situations pertaining to where Saturn is retrograding in your chart. And usually anxiety that comes from a sense of duty and responsibility. So we get anxious because we don't quite know what our role is. We get anxious because we have self-doubt about our ability to fulfill some sort of duty, some sort of responsibility in the world. And so we're anxious about it. Okay, we might be doing it. We might be fulfilling our roles. We might be fulfilling our duties, but it's coming with a sense of inner tension and inner anxiety because of the self-doubt that is present about our ability to fulfill that role. Some people, although there are some factors in the chart that can also contribute to this, but some people, when they have Saturn retrograde in their natal chart, they can find it hard to take responsibility for themselves. And they're always looking for somebody else to take care of them. Because Saturn is responsibility, Saturn is maturity. And it's just, when Saturn is retrograde, it's harder to get a grip on that. So people with this in the natal chart, and like I said, there could be other factors that are influencing this, and it doesn't always express this way for everyone, but it has been noticed that people with Saturn retrograde can be always looking for someone to take care of them. Like a guy with Saturn retrograde can't do without having a girlfriend because he needs somebody to cook dinner for him. Old school, hey. But, it's that caring for him, someone to do his washing for him. Or it could be the other way around. A woman doesn't feel confident enough to earn her own money and to pay for her own, livelihood. So she always needs a man in her life so that she can feel that she's surviving and safe. And she needs someone else to take care of her. And Saturn retrograding in a chart can be an indicator of that type of temperament or that type of personality. Now, if it's retrograde in the natal chart in houses 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 10 or 11 from the rising sign, people can have a lot of issues understanding what they do or do not owe others in this life. So that's nearly, if you've got Saturn retrograde in any of those houses, nearly all the houses, the only ones I didn't mention were the first house, the 8th and the 9th house, and the 12th house. So we've got 8 out of possible 12 houses where Saturn can be retrograding. And if you've got that in the natal chart, you can have difficulty grasping what you actually owe other people. You give too much or you don't give anything. And there's a real imbalance. There's a real polarization of how much you give, what you owe, how much you are to give of yourself for and to other people, to serve. Saturn is the servant. And with Saturn retrograding, when Saturn is retrograding, we can serve too much or we can serve not at all. And what we need to concentrate on is finding that happy balance of service and helping and healing and fixing and all those things of assistance in the world. So imbalance from Saturn is the result with the retrograde motion. So this is something that we are going to be subjected to for the next 6 months, wherever Saturn is retrograding. But as I said, just in the little intro to Saturn retrograde breakdown, this is something we're familiar with. In fact, it won't feel unusual. It won't seem, out of the box, because this is something that we go through every year. For 6 months of every year, Saturn is retrograde. So it's going to feel normal to us. It's going to feel, part of the process to us. It's only when we are aware and conscious of what is going on in the skies that we can see, aha, that's why this is like this. That's why I'm experiencing that. Whereas the rest of the time, we're kind of in this cloud of just that's the way life is, Knowledge is power. So this is Saturn retrograde knowledge. What else is happening this week? Well, there's one other thing that's occurring that I just want to mention. In the southern hemisphere where I live, the helical rising of Aldebaran is occurring. This is, as I said, the great royal star known as the Watcher of the East. It's connected to the Archangel Michael, who is all about cutting cords and releasing people from bondage. So where I live in Australia, which is sort of down the south in Victoria, the state of Victoria, the star Aldebaran has been invisible for some time. Even though we had the new moon occurring over here in Gemini with Aldebaran, as I talked about in last week's video, even though that occurred here, Aldebaran was invisible when that occurred. So Aldebaran on the 11th of June is going to rise just before sun, and you'll see it in the sky very, very early in the morning. And what does this mean? Well, let me tell you just a little bit more about Aldebaran. Aldebaran is connected to the god of Mithra or Ahura Mazda, depending on where your mythologies are coming from, the slayer of the cosmic bull. Astrologically, Aldebaran blesses honest business affairs, contacts, contracts, integrity in business. Some ancient sages saw it as a star of very great wealth, the most auspicious of the ancient fixed stars. The energy, as I said earlier, of a military strategist. So having just been activated, this star has been activated through the new moon occurring right on, bang on, 9 degrees of Gemini. This star's helical rising that's occurring may very well bring the manifestation of whatever you wished for under the new moon in Gemini at the turn of the month. So make sure you watch that video. If you haven't seen it already, go back and see what that star has in store for you that might be very pertinent. And whatever you were wishing for, whatever was on your heart at that time, whatever was in your spirit, whatever you were longing for, could manifest into reality when the helical rising of Aldebaran occurs, when Aldebaran goes from being invisible in the glare of the sun to being visible, as it does every year, but this year it's special because of the new moon that occurred at that degree. Very exciting. So do keep an eye on what occurs for you on the 11th of June. So we're going to look at Saturn for the all signs breakdown. And remember, Saturn is retrograding back to 18 degrees of Aquarius from June the 4th until October 22nd in 2022. So this is all about discipline and responsibility in our personal lives. It's harder to implement. We're going to have to be more conscious about implementing that, more conscious about acting maturely. We might have some difficulties saying no and putting boundaries in place. Knowledge is power. If we know this is the case, we're going to be able to consciously activate more boundaries where they're needed. We might be feeling some anxiety as well, maybe a sense of duty and responsibility that brings anxiety into our lives because we don't quite understand, the extent of the role we have to play. So these are the themes. Let's start with Aquarius, where Saturn is retrograding. So Saturn is retrograding in your first house, Aquarius. You might be feeling, because Saturn is old, anything old, you might be feeling a bit more older than usual right now. Older in the body. older in the soul, tireder in the soul. I know that feeling, you're just like, I'm tired, I'm weary, not in, maybe in your body, but maybe also in like, I'm just weary of dealing with things. I'm weary of having to be responsible. I'm weary of having to be mature. I've had enough, When am I going to just get a chance to play? When am I going to get a chance to rest? These feelings within your soul, these feelings also within your body. Feel more aches and pains and sort of feeling tired in the body. Worn out, exhausted kind of energy. So you can use this time to begin new health regimes, new diets and the like, simply because it's a time when we see ourselves and our life in the body more objectively. Our outlook on life changes to sort of, we can sometimes feel a bit more serious. We might even feel a bit more realistic about our approach to life. We look at our body and say, hang on, I've put on some kilos. I really need to get with the program here. And we're more objective about that sort of thing. Any illusions about ourselves and our body, any illusions about our talents and our abilities might go through a restructuring process while Saturn goes retrograde as well. But this is in order to create a new identity based on a more realistic view of who you are and your presence here in the world. So some of us might have sort of more serious, like I said, and if we take that Saturn energy to an extreme, we have a very serious, maybe even a melancholic approach to life now when Saturn is in the first house and retrograding. The opposite of that is we become like, I can't be bothered with being mature, with trying, with putting energy into my responsibilities and my duties, and I walk away from those. So as we talked about in the intro. So that is the gist of Saturn retrograde, as I said, in the first house. But as I said, Saturn retrograding is something that happens every 6 months. This is not an unusual energy. It's not going to hit you like a ton of bricks. But when you know that this is what's going on, it'll be like, now it all makes sense. And it is felt more strongly at the beginning of the retrograde period as well. Pisces rising, sun or moon, Saturn retrograding is occurring in your 12th house. Well, you're getting prepared to shift out of a cycle of endings into a cycle of fresh starts, because after Saturn has finished his retrograde motion in June, he's going to start moving forward, getting ready to transit into your first house, Pisces, in early 2023, March 2023. So you're going over old stuff. Saturn in the 12th house is ending his 30-year journey around your horoscope. So he's wrapping things up. And this retrograde period, the last retrograde period before he moves into your first house, is all about going over old territory. What needs to be restructured in readiness for the new beginning that will come when Saturn moves into your first house. So there's some heavy duty evaluation and restructuring that's going on for you. Under this heavy energy, you might be contemplating the meaning of your life. You might be evaluating your successes. You might be taking a realistic look at your perceived failures and reviewing the past. So sometimes this can cause a feeling of being a bit lost, a bit isolated. What's the point? I don't understand why I bothered and why I tried so hard, and there can be some discouragement. So forewarned, forearmed with that. But you can use this energy to make a keen sweep of your hidden psychological self. What's holding you back from all you desire now? You're going to be more objective with this Saturn retrograde period about what's holding you back. You're going to be more realistic, more down to earth about what's holding you back, and be hopefully willing to make the changes needed to restructure those things in readiness for the new start that will come. So you'll most likely find that if there is something holding you back, it's something internal, some old chestnut within you that just won't die, some skeletons in the closet that rattle their bones to self-sabotage you every now and again, Pisces. So these experiences can leave you feeling down and melancholy, especially as if you spend time reflecting on the instances where these sorts of things have happened in your life. But you can use this energy to face your demons, So it can be an uncomfortable process, Saturn retrograding in the 12th house, but Saturn can give you the energetic push to clean house, turn over a new leaf and ready for a new start that is waiting just around the corner for you Pisces. Remove outdated attachments, discard irrational fears, dump what's, not serving you. You don't need to hang on to old habits. You don't need to hang on to old identities that you have actually outgrown by now. You might feel more like keeping to yourself now. Pisces is familiar with that energy, so that's just fine. But it is healthy also to indulge in a bit of escapism to help you with the releasing and refining process that this energy is calling you to. I will just point out, remember, Saturn is extremes, takes things to extremes. If you go on a holiday, you might not work for 6 months, you might be feeling ultra lazy, no boundaries, no inhibitions. Saturn moving through the 12th house in retrograde motion, and so it's harder to actually accomplish things while Saturn is retrograde, harder to get your butt into gear, so to speak, because there's no boundaries, no limitations on your need to relax and rest and take it easy. Hopefully for some Pisces people, that might mean that you have the means to do that, the means to sort of tap out a bit, to take a break for a bit. That would be very kind, Saturn, if you could allow that to be the case. But yeah, extremes. So extremes in escapism and no boundaries around your tapping out could be a problem. So forewarned, forearmed. But I will just remind you, Pisces, that this energy is not unfamiliar. Saturn retrogrades for 6 months out of every year. We know all about this. It's not going to feel like it hits you with a ton of bricks. You will have experienced these kinds of retrograde motions before. So take what I've just said with a bit of a grain of salt, but with conscious awareness of what's going on. Aries rising, sun or moon. People, we're seeing Saturn in its retrograding motion in your 11th house. So you might be feeling a bit of a heavy weight when Saturn goes retrograde regarding your personal goals, how you fit in with others, your affiliations with people, with groups, with peers. These things become serious matters. You might have some heavy responsibilities to these people, or you might be running from your responsibilities with these people. A lot of people start to feel during Saturn retrograde in the 11th house that their friendships and group involvements are too frivolous, too fluffy, and so you can either, if you're finding, oh my God, all they can talk about is Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, and you're like, I don't want to be friends with those people anymore. So we can absolutely restructure our friendship groups during this time, because Saturn says, I don't want frivolousness anymore, and we take things to an extreme of, I want only mature friends. Or maybe it can be the other polarity. You've got friends and they're just so serious and they're just so negative and everything's woe is me and they're melancholic, and you're like, I want somebody who wants to lighten up a bit and have some fun. So you go to the other extreme. There's no in between. Saturn retrograding in the 11th house can bring either of those scenarios. So connections and networks can tend to leave a bit of an unsatisfied taste in our mouths during this particular transit, but it's okay. This is only a 6-month energy. It's a familiar energy. We go through this every year. We have Saturn retrograding every year, not always in your 11th house, I might add, Aries, but this is, unless we're aware that Saturn is retrograding and we're looking for the hallmarks of this signature, then we often don't realize it, that this is what's going on. So this is just to give you more awareness for the next 6 months. But don't let it sour usually beautiful connections just because there's this touch of melancholy or a touch of frivolousness. Be conscious, be aware, so that you don't destroy good friendships during this time. So you might feel alienated, you might feel lonely like an outsider. This is not uncommon during Saturn retrograde, and it might allow you to restructure necessary connections and make them more workable. Think about deleting Facebook friendships that never amounted to much, that you really didn't have time for. Well, that's actually a healthy thing, to get rid of connections that were weighing you down. Or switching your text messaging to silent to ignore that 16th message from your activist friend, to give you a break. Now, these sorts of restructurings can, especially with social media like I've just described, can be very helpful. It's like we can't be bothered with the social niceties any longer, even though it can leave us feeling a bit on the outside of things. So, who is contributing valuably to your life? Do an assessment now with Saturn turning retrograde. What networks are actually carrying some form of meaning for you? What aspirations and goals and dreams, 11th house, feel aligned with your joy now? Assess those things. This is some time where you can actually use this energy to do some mature restructuring. Jump into that mature, like extensively mature energy of Saturn retrograding and allow it to take you to a better place, even though it might come with a bit of painful culling for the time being. Taurus rising, sun or moon people. Well, the energy of Saturn retrograding is happening in an angular house, your 10th house. So if you have your rising degree around 18 to 25 degrees of Taurus, then you might feel this a little more succinctly than others because Saturn is currently on an angle from you. But you're probably going to be wanting more of a secure foundation in the world. However, this transit might have you feeling more frustrated because you haven't reached that desired pinnacle yet, that level of achievement that you're longing for, that you're wanting. We might be more inclined to scrutinize our perceived failures and get down in the doldrums because of it while Saturn is retrograding. So if we've been hoping for some sort of career recognition or rewards, we might be disappointed that they're a little bit thin on the ground and they're not coming as we thought they would. It can be very discouraging. You might even get criticized at some point over the next 6 months by an authority figure or somebody in charge or somebody you look up to. Or the work that you've undertaken, is disregarded. You've been working on a project for 6 months and Saturn goes retrograde and they say, oh, we don't need that project anymore, and all your work has been in vain. These sorts of frustrations of an extreme nature can be present. Don't let it get you down. Saturn goes retrograde every 6 months. So he'll be direct for 6 months and retrograde for approximately 6 months of each year. We're familiar with his retrograde energy, so it's not going to hit you like a ton of bricks. What I'm trying to do here is illustrate for you how it works so you have conscious awareness. If you lose that project, if that project you've been working on gets chucked, you can go, oh, Saturn retrograde, of course. Okay, I'm not going to let it bog me down. That's just the energy that we're in right now. It's nothing I've done personally. It's nothing to do with me. It's just Saturn. It makes things so much better when we have knowledge about what is actually going on. And then we have the ability to bounce back more stoically and to put one foot in front of another and keep going. This is a time during the next 6 months when you're going to become aware of what you have and have not accomplished. And because of this, we can actually begin to look to restructure our lives do things that are going to lead to more satisfaction. So we're sensitized regarding our success in the world, our achievements in the world, and our reputation. So don't be surprised if, you're feeling a little bit vulnerable in that regard with those things. If somebody says, we're not going to use that project you've been working on, it may really impact you harder than when Saturn's direct. Be aware of that and you'll understand why and be able to be more stoic about it. There can be some threats to your social standing as well that might occur that could really pierce through your armor of stoicism now. I've just given you an illustration of one way that can happen. All your hard work, all your good efforts, all your attempts for recognition with a project get thrown out the door. That's an attack or a threat to your reputation, to your social standing. And of course, that can be very frustrating. This is also a transit that can cause us to feel very burdened by our duties and obligations out in the world. Not our duties and obligations to our family, not our duties and obligations to ourself per se, but our requirements at work and in career and out there in the public realm. So it's not about having too many responsibilities, but rather about having very large scale and important responsibilities that leave us feeling anxious and pressurized. So forewarned is forearmed, Taurus. Gemini rising, sun or moon people, the energy of Mercury retrograde, Saturn retrograde for the next 6 months is occurring in your 9th house. Now, this is not an unusual energy. We know all about Saturn retrograde because it occurs for 6 months out of every year. So it's familiar to us. It's not going to hit you like a ton of bricks, but I want you to be conscious. I want you to be aware of its effects so that when things happen, you're like, oh, it's not my fault. This is just Saturn retrograde. Ta-da! So in the 9th house, you've got to assess, okay, what are you working towards? What's your aspirations? You know, what's filling the viewer of your binoculars right now? Where are you looking to go? 9th house is very much about destiny and where you're heading. So under this influence of Saturn retrograde, you might feel that some of your goals have actually become a bit fluffy, not really that important in the scheme of things. What you thought was important once upon a time, it's like, oh my God, how did I even engage with that as an aspiration, you know? It's just so immaterial to the lives we're all living right now. No longer important in the scheme of things. We can begin to make an entire review of what we're striving for during Saturn retrograde in the 9th house. And so some Gemini people will completely restructure their focus for living right now during Saturn retrograding. This only happens in your 9th house once every 30 odd, 28, 29 years. So it is a rare experience in that sense to have Saturn retrograde in the 9th house. And because of it, you might change your direction and focus for life completely. Now, usually this will come as a bit of an internal confrontation as well. You're looking at yourself and you're looking at who you are and who you want to be, and you're changing everything because you're not happy with the way things are. You're not happy with the status quo. So is your goal actually to reveal the real truth of who you are now? The real truth of where you want to go? And do you need to change your parameters in order to achieve the real truth of who you want to be? The 9th house is about living our truth, being real. What needs to change in order for you to do that? It's time to get serious, Saturn retrograde. Time to get real about who you are and who you want to be. You might also have to face up to some self-defeating attitudes during Saturn retrograde in the 9th house as well. Have you been repressing your 9th house sense of adventure? Holding it back. Oh, I've got to do this. I've got to keep all my responsibilities and duties to the kids and the family and the job and the blah, so I can't just run off and take that trip to Machu Picchu. Is that you? Saturn might be saying, throw caution to the wind and go to Machu Picchu, you know. You might be forced to evaluate, am I repressing my adventurous side? And how can I satisfy my adventurous side? So keeping yourself from your ultimate dream through some sort of negativity can also be present. I can't do that because I never get very far, or I am not good enough, or there's always someone better than me. I mean, negativity is a Saturn thing. And we are going back over our old attitudes and belief systems, 9th house's belief systems, where we have too much negativity that is holding us back. Saturn is causing you to revisit those things and restructure those things and hopefully throw that out with this retrograde motion. This is not really a transit to pull you out of the melancholic doldrums though, but it just might cause you to look objectively at your future options and prepare you for making active change when this transit winds up in about 6 months. So it's a reviewing time to get you to refocus, restructure, and redirect the whole course of your life. So it could be, in a sense, quite exciting, but it's likely to come out of a sense of heaviness with where you're currently at. It's a period of self-questioning. There could even be a bit of a lack of self-confidence and doubt that comes with this transit. But you might be able to use the blessings of the 9th house, remember it's the house of divine blessing, to redirect where you're heading so it aligns more with your truth. It aligns more with some new beliefs that you take on during this time and new ethics, and you can move forward in a more mature way at the end of this transit, Gemini. We're looking at October being the end of this transit. For Cancer, rising sun or moon people, well, Saturn is transiting in your 8th house. Now, this Saturn transit, it lasts for 6 months, so it's not something that we are unfamiliar with. It occurs for 6 months of every year, but it will only occur retrograding through Aquarius roughly once every 30 odd years. So in that sense, it's rare to have it occur in Cancer in your 8th house. And so it has particular meaning for you in the 8th house. And what it is, it's dissatisfactions and frustrations with getting what you want, especially with relationship to your partnerships and connections and your partner's resources. So let's say you've got a business partnership, you've got a contract with somebody else, they're your business partner, and you are having trouble getting them to cough up their part of the business money that you had to put up, their contribution. There can be dissatisfaction, frustrations with the material contributions to life of the other people in our world. Or maybe it's a personal relationship, frustration with your partner not contributing to the preparation of food, because this is the 2nd house from the 7th. So your partner and their 2nd house is seen through the 8th house. So the 2nd house for your partner is food and the food that we eat. Your partner during this Saturn retrograde phase might be like, I can't be bothered cooking, I know my partner's going to do that. They make all the meals, so I'll just go play computer games and sit on my bed and play on my laptop while they cook dinner and clean up every single night. This is Saturn retrograding in the 8th house energy. Frustrating, yeah? So this is what I'm talking about. With the material things that are part of our connections with other people, the food of other people, the clothing of other people, the money of other people, their material contribution to the lives that you have together with them, frustration. You might also be confronted with the circumstances that force previously repressed issues to now come to the surface. How are you handling your power or your lack of power in your relationships? Saturn retrograding can bring that thing to an extreme point where you're like, I have to deal with this. I can't sweep it under the rug anymore. It's just too much. Is everything well in your intimate relationships? I would suggest if it's not, you sort things out prior to Saturn going retrograde. It would be helpful. What unhealthy attachments need to be undone now and let go of now? You might be reviewing those things. You might be feeling very sensitive to these forces that are bringing up these deep issues, these deep attachments, these deep frustrations. And not that Saturn is a planet of explosions and violence or anything. It's certainly not that, but it could bring painful issues frustratingly to the fore with other people. And it's not necessarily a reactive transit, like I said, but it can be a very painful one, especially where there are already existing difficult problems with debt, sex, control, power battles, that sort of thing. So these things will come to the surface in order to be purged. 8th house has to do with purging now when Saturn retrogrades. So another thing that can happen during Saturn's retrograde phase in the 8th house is that you can be more aware of your mortality. This can enter into your consciousness now because the 8th house has to do with our mortality and the harsh reality of Saturn in the house of death. But the good news is regarding this is Saturn becomes very he's stronger when he's retrograde, and so we're far more objective about death. And we can tap into this realistic view of the mortality of our human lives. You can not that you need to go and prepay a funeral or anything like that, but you're more realistic about life in the body. You realize I'm not going to be here forever. So what restructuring do I need to do to put things in place? Maybe I've got a bit of debt. Maybe I need to get out of debt so that my children aren't saddled with the burden of my debt. Maybe that's something that comes up for you this time as you contemplate your mortality. And scenarios like that might be very common over the next 6 months. So how do you deal with this, Cancer rising people? As I said, it is a familiar energy, but it only happens once every 30 or so years in your 8th house. Well, you tap into your inner stoicism, your self-mastery, rather than reactively trying to control everything in your world. So if you practice acceptance, you practice endurance, then you'll fare much better. And I would also add to that, be willing to make changes where change is necessary in order for life to feel more fulfilled and more nourishing for you as well. Leo rising, sun or moon people, well, Saturn will be retrograding for you in your 7th house. Saturn will be retrograde for 6 months, the next 6 months. But you know what? Saturn retrogrades for 6 months out of every year. So that's not unusual. It won't hit you like a ton of bricks. But it only retrogrades in your 7th house once every sort of 28, 29, 30 years or so. So in that sense, it's rare to have Saturn retrograding in your 7th house. And it can bring about frustration with partners. This is not uncommon under this energy. This could be your business partners. It could be your audience, your clients. It could be your marriage partners, any significant other people in your life. And something that they do or something that they say leaves us feeling sad or despondent or unappreciated. Now, if you already have a partner, this is a time when any issues surrounding compromise and flexibility can rear their heads over the next 6 months. You might feel unduly criticized by a partner now, and that can cause sensitivity and frustration. If you're single, you might get in the doldrums over your relational status during Saturn retrograde. Loneliness, melancholy can enter in during Saturn retrograde regarding that issue. They can have you reacting to your relationship circumstances despondently. Knowledge is power. If you see that happening, realize, okay, it's not me. There's nothing wrong with me. It's actually Saturn's energetic influence. And have some strategies up your sleeve to help you at that time. You know what? I'm going to put on a really cool movie and try and, cheer myself up. Or I'm going to go out and hang with some friends who really love me so that I'm surrounded by the love that I am craving or missing if I am single and longing for love and connection. You might be feeling pressurized during Saturn's retrograde phase to find someone, like time is running out. Saturn's the master of time. Or that there's a limited supply of options for partners in your life. But remember to keep your stoicism, keep reality, and keep objective about this. Remember, this is just an energy that's going to only last 6 months. And then the whole gist of things will change. You'll never have to go through this again for another 30 years. So, just realizing that can be very, very empowering. Also, acknowledging and accepting the world and this energy for what it is at this time will help this period pass, relatively quickly for you. So, also, Saturn is the ruler, Leo, of your 7th house. Now, sometimes for some Leo people, that can mean that a partner will enter into your life. Now, there needs to be other things going on as well. Aspects from Jupiter are very helpful. Venus and Mars also can play into it. Your progress chart, solar arc chart, dashes, all those things need to be taken into consideration about whether or not a partner can come in. However, Saturn, ruler of the 7th, transiting the 7th is a strong indicator for relationships. And when Saturn goes retrograde, his energy is amplified. So it's possible if you're single with this that you could go to one extreme. Oh, poor me, I don't have a partner, I'm melancholy, I'm low, I'm despondent about that, boo-hoo. Or go to the complete other extreme where all of a sudden you got partners to beat the band. It probably depends on the age that you are. If you're older, this is likely to be the case. Saturn is older age. And so if you're like me, sort of getting up there, then, suddenly, Leo people, you might have a ton of partners to choose from because the boundaries, remember I said in the intro to this video, Saturn, when he's retrograde, takes boundaries to an extreme. We have too little, no boundaries regarding our ability to stoically deal with, nobody in our life or feeling lonely, or no boundaries regarding partnership. Suddenly they're everywhere and we're batting men or women off with a stick because there's no parameters, there's no walls, no blockage, no restriction. It just blows right out. So I hope you get the gist of what I mean by no boundaries when Saturn is in this state. So just to wrap up this, responsibilities, if you have a partner, a business partner, some clients, not so much work colleagues, but actual contractual partners or contractual clients, also marriage partners as well. You might have more responsibilities to those partners. There's more of a need to compromise, and you might have to get very mature with the realities of the needs of others in your life. Other people's needs might increase during this time, and yet your ability to handle those extra responsibilities might decrease. Awareness is helpful, and obviously knowing your natal chart is helpful too. Some people are naturally more stoic than others because of the way their natal charts are configured. So your ability to handle those things is very much determined by what's in your natal chart, but the pressure could increase with this retrograde motion. Awareness is helpful. If you know why the pressure's increased, Saturn's retrograde, you can cope so much better. But we're forced to begin seeing others as individuals under this transit and to improve the manner in which we relate to and with other people now. Virgo rising, sun or moon people, the energy of Saturn going retrograding is occurring in your 6th house. Now, this is not as bad as one might think, even though the 6th house in some circles of astrology is considered malefic. Well, the 6th house is actually a malefic house, but Saturn is a malefic planet. And when you have a malefic planet in a malefic house, they kind of cancel each other out. Or malefic planets do very well in malefic houses because they've got what it takes to deal with the heavy-duty issues. In this case, Saturn is stoicism, endurance, perseverance in the house of problems. The ability to persevere and endure and be stoic about the problems in your life. But it's not all nasty like that and having to deal with problems and issues. It doesn't necessarily mean more problems and issues are going to come into your life, but you will have the ability to handle them. So expect with this transit to feel more pressurized in the area of your daily work, not your career aspirations and your worldly projects. That's a 10th house thing. But the 6th house is, what we do to pay the bills, that drudgerous job. And so many of us have them. That's just life. Drudgerous job, daily habits, daily routine. We might feel more pressure in that realm. We might feel more pressure with our health. We might feel that our responsibilities and duties and our accountability at work might feel burdensome now. Like, they're just expecting too much of me, or I just can't be bothered anymore with what they require of me. That can make us feel irritable. It can make us feel bogged down by an overwhelming load. So Saturn impacts us regarding our karma, and this is the house of burning our karma because it's the house that's opposite the house of our karma, which is the 12th house. So burning our karma, getting rid of our karma is 6th house, and Saturn is the planet of karma. So our past, it's things we might have previously neglected or disregarded now come up for our introspection and critique to get rid of, to purge those things out of our lives. Saturn is also service in the house of service in this case. So where can you serve? Where can you help? Where can you heal? Where can you fix a problem? If you've put your attention there and focus on that, this period of your life, and remember, Saturn only transits in your 6th house once every 30 years or so, and so in that sense it's rare, even though Saturn retrogrades every 6 months, once a year basically for 6 months, so it's not unusual, but in your 6th house it's rare. This is a chance for you to really burn the karma. so that you can come out the other side of this retrograde process, fully cleared of all the shit from past lives and all the old chestnuts, all the old attitudes and all the old BS that you don't want anymore in your life. Clear that stuff. Now is the chance when you can really get full on about that. No limitations about how you're dealing with it. And you do it by serving. You do it by looking for who you can help. How can you fix a problem? How can you heal some issue in your life or in the lives of others? Be there for others, serve, help, heal, fix, and burn that karma during this time. It is very important that you cross your T's and dot your I's during this transit. It's a good time to restructure your health as well and your well-being by addressing your diet and your exercise routines, perhaps with a view to ultimately making it feel more joyful for you when Saturn goes direct. Like if you can get into a good habit while Saturn is retrograding for the next 6 months, then, maybe you're overweight and you decide you're going to start jogging. Okay, you get out there, you start jogging. It's hard work for the first 6 months, but you're determined, you persevere, you're stoic about it. You bring in those Saturn qualities. At the end of the 6 months, you can't wait to go for your evening jog. You're like, you're taking your runners with you to work because you're going to, you're just itching to put them on and get going once work is done at the end of the day. And it turns from a drudgery to a joy when Saturn goes direct. So use this time for your benefit, for the greatest opportunity. How efficiently and practically are you using your time? Saturn is time. 6th house is efficiency and practicality. So these things might be brought up to address now too. Are you using your time efficiently and practically? Usually it'll be through some sort of stressful circumstance over the next 6 months that will emphasize that, but it's a time for learning to be more productive, healthier, more well-focused, and to have a better routine. Thank you, Virgo. For Libra rising sun or moon people, the energy of Saturn retrograding is occurring for you in your 5th house. And Saturn only retrogrades in your 5th house once every 29-ish years. So it's a rare occurrence to have Saturn retrograding in your 5th house. But Saturn retrogrades for 6 months of every year. So it's not an unusual experience, Libra. It's familiar. It won't hit you like a ton of bricks, but it is going to affect your 5th house realm. So you might feel during Saturn's retrograde for the next 6 months that you're in a creative funk. Now, if you are a creative person, if you're, like, say, a writer or a performer or a singer or something like that, who usually pumps out an album, every year or two, and this might be a 6 month period where suddenly the creative juices just aren't flowing. The well dries up. Don't be frustrated at yourself if that occurs, Libra, because it's the energy of Saturn. And just say, okay, well, that's what that is. You know what? I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to get on with my waitressing job or my barista job or whatever it is that you do, and just, go through life, knowing that it will end. The creative funk will come to an end. So how you find your joy, how you entertain yourself, how you engage with your inner child, they may all feel like they're stuck in quicksand as well right now, with no momentum, no spark. You might even feel a bit hopeless. And you know what it's like when you're trying to get the creative juices flowing, but it's just not coming, and you want to hurl something against the wall in an agony of frustration. Just be kind to yourself during this time. It's not something that you can help if you're feeling that way, and it's not your fault, and there's nothing wrong with you. It's the energy of Saturn retrograding. So keep in mind as you place one heavy foot in front of the other now, Libra, that it is common energy and it'll soon be over. And then Saturn will not retrograde in your 5th house again for another 29-ish years. So endurance is the name of the game. So you might also be called during this time to address some sort of ego issues. Ego is connected to the 5th house. How you identify yourself, what makes you you. And you might be, you might be called to ask yourself, are you honoring your own egoic needs? And if not, where do you need to make changes? Saturn might cause you to get introspective about those things? What about your pride? That's a fifth house thing. Is it getting in the way of who you could be? Are you too proud to take that barista job and you'd rather sort of sit with no electricity on in your home because you can't afford to pay the bills, when you could go and get that job at the cafe or work as a checkout chick or something? You know, where is your pride getting in the way of you being able to have a functional life? You might need to address those sorts of things as well during this transit. Saturn is very practical and realistic and objective. It's going to make you not buy into that, but sort of get with the program in that regard. Your truth, your joy, your ability to know real love. These are things you might be assessing as well. What makes you unique? Are you honoring your autonomy? Are you honoring what makes you joyful? Are you honoring your need to know real love? Or are you being too proud? These are issues that can come up while Saturn's retrograde in the fifth house. What about your need to individuate? Highly individual house, the fifth house. Even though it's Aquarius for you guys, you know, that can be a bit back the front, you know. Aquarius is very much about the group. Fifth house is very much about the individual. There's still the question when Saturn, sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. And still the question when Saturn is retrograding in the fifth house, how are you honoring your need to individuate? So all of these questions might be presenting themselves to you now in order that you can rebuild your identity over the next 6 months. First, through dismantling the old so that the new can be built in its place. And it's time to create a solid sense of self under this influence. So this can make you melancholy from time to time as you're rebuilding who you are, and that might arise from feelings of being unseen or unloved or neglected or ignored. If that occurs, tell yourself it's only a 6-month transit. Okay, I might be feeling unloved. Okay, I might be feeling neglected. That is just a 6-month period. I'm going to rebuild myself and restructure my life and rechange my identity so that the joy comes in 6 months' time when Saturn goes direct. It's time to tap into your own inner well of self-love, Libra, and lavish it upon yourself as an antidote to those feelings that will pass in 6 months' time. You are so good, Libra, at giving love to others, at giving attention to others, at honoring others. I want to encourage you during this Saturn retrograde process that occurs once in 29 years in your fifth house. Lavish that upon yourself. Forget other people for 6 months. Focus on restructuring, loving, nurturing you so that you can re-emerge after the Saturn retrograde period more empowered. Scorpio rising, sun or moon people, Saturn is retrograding for you in your fourth house. This is an angular house. You will feel it more strongly because of that, Scorpio, for a start. And Saturn only retrogrades in your fourth house once every 29-ish years. So it's rare to have him retrograding in your fourth house. So there's going to be certain things that come out of this that wouldn't usually occur. However, we are familiar with Saturn's retrograde energy because he does it for 6 months out of every year, and therefore it's not going to hit you like the proverbial ton of bricks. So it's going to see you over the next 6 months restructuring your inner foundations of who you are. Now, there could be some tension about this, some weariness about this. However, you know, even in small ways, there might be some life-changing personal and psychological advances and developments that come out of this inner struggle. So don't see it as wasteful or why am I so low and it doesn't, you know, it's not fair. You know, we can't be happy all the time. We grow through like a shoot pushing through the crust of the earth to form a beautiful daffodil or something. That's the way that this can work. You know, we're pushing through the old blockages and foundations, and it's tense and it's weary, and out we come into something new. So this is a chance to re-identify yourself once you've dealt with the inner struggle, to connect with your heritage, to connect with your roots, and maybe shake up some attachments to your past self. You might even be inspired to reorganize your home during the next 6 months. You know, it might even be thinking about moving. And this will come, if you do feel like moving, it'll come due to a feeling of dissatisfaction with where you are. It's not like, oh, suddenly I've got the job of a lifetime and away I go. No, it's like, I'm so sick of this place. It's always freezing cold. The heater doesn't work. You know, it's not enough room, not enough storage. I'm sick of it. I'm so dissatisfied. And you're like, that's it. I'm moving. Saturn can bring about that eventuality when he's retrograding in your fourth house. Now, there might be some obstacles to your ability to take some concrete steps in that regard. That's just Saturn. Take stock. You'll probably find that you might have some inner resistance. You're dissatisfied, you want to move, but you're afraid to move. What about the costs of moving? What about how am I going to find a place that I can afford? And, there's some inner tension and inner battling, inner polarization that needs to be worked through so that you can end up in a better place, quite literally, in 6 months' time. So it's likely that the resistance is coming from within to your being able to make the changes to help you feel more satisfied. This is the house of our happiness. And so to help you feel happy in the world, there might be some inner resistance that Saturn is going to force you to address over the next 6 months. So it's hard to feel brave externally during this transit. Like I just suggested, you're dissatisfied with where you're living, for example, or dissatisfied with a current dynamic with a family member or something like that, and yet taking that leap, making that change feels scary. Usually Scorpio people are edge walkers and they're willing to take a risk, but this Saturn retrograding here in this realm of the chart might see you a little more hesitant than usual. So I would encourage you to direct your energy into some sort of, let's call it spring cleaning of the soul, spring cleaning of the home. This will help you feel better. If you declutter, if you reorganize, restructure your home or your soul, or, like if your house feels too small, paint it a brighter, lighter color so that it feels more spacious, take some strategies to restructure these things. And that's what I mean by spring cleaning. And it'll help you feel a bit better and perhaps help you get a little bit more perspective over the next 6 months about how to make the change and how to take the steps you want to take. So feeling limitations on your life in terms of home and family dynamics can cause frustration. You might feel a bit lonely. You might feel a bit isolated too under this particular energy. But this energy will pass in 6 months, and then Saturn won't retrograde here again for another 29 years. So hang in there. There is purpose to this retrograde motion, and it could see you in a much better place at the end of this 6 month period, Scorpio. Sagittarius rising sun or moon people. Well, the energy of Saturn retrograding for you is occurring in the third house, the house of siblings and relatives and small business affairs and buying and selling and trading and advertising and communications and writing, teaching and learning. So here is Saturn retrograding in this house for the last time for the next 29 years. So it's rare in that instance. Every 29 years we get a retrograde of Saturn occurring in the third house. And so this is unusual in that regard. But however, Saturn's retrograde motion happens every 6 months. So, so for 6 months, out of every year. So it's not unusual to have Saturn retrograde, and so it's not going to hit you like a ton of bricks. But what I want to do is create more awareness of your experience in the next 6 months, and you can be like, that's Saturn. It's not me. There's nothing wrong with me. It's Saturn's energy in retrograde motion. So you might be feeling great pressure in your social circles now, with your friends, with your colleagues. Your expectations of them might be weighing heavily on you, or their expectations of you might be weighing heavily on you. Your mind can be weighted down too, Sagittarius. You might be feeling, it's the house of the mind, you might be feeling more despondent, more discouraged, more melancholy while Saturn is retrograding. You might be feeling more pressured now to produce something, to come up with the goods in terms of some ideas or some tangible product or some new learning opportunity, and yet you might feel like the spark of creativity is just gone. Maybe you're somebody who creates online courses or something, teaching, third house, and usually you produce a course every couple of months, and now boof, Saturn goes retrograde in your third house and it's just tumbleweed city. Nothing's coming to you. Well, I want you to not blame yourself and to just, accept what is and realize this is just a season, and it's a season that won't occur for another 29 years. So, knowing that can hopefully give you some armory as you deal with sort of the despondency that might come through the lack of creative spark. But it's a period where you might find that your worries increase. House of the mind, Saturn retrograding increases Saturn energy, greater worries. It doesn't mean that you've got greater problems, it just means you're worrying about things more. So have some strategies at hand to deal with this. So relationships with siblings, neighbors, colleagues, they could all be quite stressed and pressurized now. And so even though you have a desire to connect with these people, it might be harder than usual. Maybe the time, Saturn is time. Maybe you don't have time to connect. Or when you do, maybe you feel a bit distant, a bit isolated, like you're not connecting in some way with these people. You know, if you cut to the chase with your communication, if you avoid tiresome small talk, being exhausted by the business of life, these things are part of this energy, fed up with the small talk, exhausted by the requirements of everyday reality, being more blunt with your communication. That is a result of Saturn retrograding in the third house, and you might be on the receiving end of that. You might be also on the giving end of that kind of behavior. You might even encounter more obstructions to your day-to-day life than usual. There might be more red tape, roadblocks, authoritarianism. So how do we deal with this? Well, having patience and a long-range view beyond the present moment can be very, very helpful. Keep in mind, this is a 6-month transit, and then it will never occur in this house again. And you can use this energy, Saturn energy, to restructure how you're thinking, to restructure maybe those courses that you're producing. Maybe you restructure them during this time, review them, and work out where you could improve them, so that when October rolls around and Saturn goes direct, you've got a whole new way of doing those courses that's far more appealing, more brilliant, more in alignment with what people want, and you get more success in the long run. So use this period to introspect about all these things, relationships with siblings and neighbors, and how you learn, how you're communicating, etc., how you're running your small business. Use this energy to review those things, to go deep inward with those things, and you might find that there are some amazing solutions that come up for you in the next 6 months to make life work better for you in the long run. Capricorn rising sun or moon people, well, thanks for sticking with us, Capricorn, as we waited for your sign to rock around and look at Saturn retrograding for you in the second house. Now, Saturn only retrogrades in the second house for you guys once every 29 years. So it's rare. But Saturn spends 6 months of every year in retrograde motion. So we're not unfamiliar with Saturn's retrograde energy. It's just his retrograde energy in the second house that's a bit more unfamiliar to us, Capricorn. So this is a time to do a stock take of your self-worth, your family situation, and your finances. So, where are you not being practical and realistic with your finances, Capricorn? I mean, you might need to address this now. You might need to redo a budget over the next 6 months. You might need to rein in your spending in some way to get more mature with your spending and not be so frivolous with your spending. It's not a great energy for generating material success, I've got to say, to have Saturn retrograding in the second house, unless there are other factors in your chart personally that are changing this. So you might be quite frustrated at your material ambitions in that regard. They're not manifesting, they're not fruiting the way you wanted them to. You might also be quite dissatisfied with where you stand financially in the world, but it is a good energy for putting some changes in place during this time to help you out materially in the future when Saturn goes direct in 6 months. It's also time to sort of look at validating, because this is a house of values, validating yourself, and at this time when Saturn is retrograde, it has to come from within. Your validation and self-worth has to come within, not from outside yourself. And especially as Saturn rules the second house, it is a chance to look at, where am I self-sabotaging? Where am I holding myself back and not valuing myself? Maybe, I started a home food delivery business during COVID lockdown or something like that. And I was charging like really cheap prices because I wanted to get this business off the ground. And lo and behold, I need to sit down during Saturn retrograde and go, well, hang on. Am I valuing my time, my energy, my work, my skills? If the answer is no, then you need to do restructuring of that during Saturn retrograde. And that needs to come from within you. It's not going to come from someone saying, hey, you're charging way too cheap for your homemade meals that you home deliver. Nobody's going to say that to you. It needs to come from within you, this change in how you value what you've got to give to the world. Saturn retrograding here is going to make you address that. This is also a house of self-sufficiency, and it's time to embrace self-sufficiency now in the material world as well as in your own self-perception and identity. No more looking for validation from outside of you. It has to be generated from within, self-sufficient validation. But also you might need to consider during Saturn's retrograde here, Capricorn, how can you generate self-sufficiency in money? You might be looking to start a small business. You might be looking to invest money in new ways that's going to allow you to be more self-sufficient in the world. So due to the heaviness of Saturn retrograde, because Saturn's energy is amplified during the retrograde process, you might feel very unsupported during this time. But I would encourage you to turn your attention within and be prepared to work on changing your understanding of self so that you can be your source of support that you really need in the world. Materially, emotionally, value-wise, realize that you can be the change that you need in your world. You're all that you really need, Capricorn. And I think this is one of the greatest realizations that can come through having Saturn retrograde through our second house. We no longer look outside of us for our, and that can be very much the case with Aquarius, which is all about large groups of people, so out there. Instead, with Saturn retrograding through here, we start to look within. What have I got within me that I can depend on? How can I be stoic? How can I not care what other people think so much so that my life works better for me and I function more self-sufficiently without depending on other people? That's really the hallmark of Saturn moving through this area of your chart. So thank you one and all for joining me for this sojourn around the horoscope. I hope you have a blessed Saturn retrograde period for the next 6 months, and I'll catch you with another Astro Weather Report next week.